This is Nick from Boston, and this is the Katie Black Show.
What's up? Welcome to the
Hello.
Katie Black Show. I am honored. Today I have with me
Matt Harris from many things.
many things.
Yes.
A fixture in Charlotte radio for how many years?
Came here in 2001, May of 2001. Did the afternoon show on, at that time, 107.9 The Link, Matt and Ramona. And then about 2 years ago, we switched to the morning mix with Matt and Ramona. And then Ramona decided to do something else. She's still with the company, which still comes on the air on occasion, and it became morning mix with Matt and friends.
Well, a lot to dissect, but first of all, since I'm, my show is based in Charlotte and it's like kind of centric to Charlotte, I always ask people, what do you think of the growth? Especially, you've been here for so many years.
It is crazy. I think it's great. In most cases, I wish the roads had kept up with the growth, especially in the suburban type areas. Like I'm in Fort Mill. Got here in 2010, I think. Here I lived in so many sections. But I remember when we came here in 2001 and they were going to take us out and show us big time Charlotte and all that, and went uptown. And at the time, there was Rock Bottom Brewery. And I'm trying to think of the name of the place, which is catty corner to it. What was it called back then? But it went through various changes, and it was a sort of a sports bar kind of thing. So it was those two, Have a Nice Day Cafe, and Bar Charlotte. That was it. There was 4 places uptown in 2001, really, for any real sense of going out. And now, forget about it.
Forget about it. Well, do you like the growth? Or are you just...
Yeah, well, I especially the Uptown, South End, all that growth is, I think, is fantastic. A live, much more vibrant city is great. Like going down to the Beyonce, I didn't go to the show, but I went to the pre-party. And
Right.
getting that energy of the concert and all the energy of all the condos and townhouses and apartments that are built down there. And then when I lived in the South End in 2009, I think there wasn't much there at all, and now it's insane. I that's all great. I think I really think that's makes it for a great place for younger people, especially, to move, and you want that influx in your city to keep it energized. So I think the growth has been great. There's some things that a little better planning might have helped. Yeah, as far as roads and that sort of thing. They've kind of went like, let's build and then we'll figure it out, and that never works out. But I think the growth of Charlotte is fantastic. It's a really cool place now. It really wasn't in the early 2000s.
Well, yeah, I guess that's an interesting way to look at it now. There's like a pulse. There's a vibe going on.
Yeah. I mean, to have people come here and visit, to go uptown is a cool thing now. It really... 20 early aughts, if you will. I don't think a lot of people even considered coming to Charlotte except for stopping on the way if they were flying somewhere, or if they were driving to Walt Disney World. They'd stop if you lived here. It really wasn't, let's go party in Charlotte. It was always, let's go party in Atlanta or even Raleigh before Charlotte, because the college is around there. But yeah, I think it's great. I think it's the growth is helpful to making you have an area where companies want to move in. When you have big companies moving, that always helps the situation economically. I mean, there's affordable housing issues and that sort of thing. But in general, the growth is great.
Before we get into the radio world, I always ask people, where were they born / where did they grow up?
Born in Pennsylvania, and most of my growing up years, almost all of them except for like one, was in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, which is in Bucks County, about 20 miles northwest of Philly, suburb of Philly.
And so I know that's like hard to put in a nutshell, but essentially what was that like?
It's weird because it's changed a lot. Like here, the growth, right? So before there's kind of more of a separation between that and the city, and the city has really come out now. And so this little tiny house where I grew up in, which was 3 bedroom, 1 bathroom, I don't even know how many square foot, not many. My bedroom I shared with my brother, super tiny closet like that wide. And my parents bought for whatever, 5,000 or something in the 60s. Is now like I think they sold it for like $600,000. And it's a 3 bedroom, 1 bath.
Right.
But now it is so close to all the stuff that's going on in Philly that
Hot market.
it went through the roof. But my high school was kind of a mix of some country, which is mostly gone now, but some country and kids who were growing up pretty wealthy because they had family worked in the city, and then you had me or my dad was a school teacher, and we were, at a different level between them both. But it was cool. You don't really, when you're going through it, to everybody's normal is their normal, right? You don't even think that, wow, I was in this. I mean, I knew I was in a smaller house than almost every single one of my friends or something like that, but it wasn't like a big deal.
Yeah, well, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, yeah, and I wasn't social at all, so I didn't go anywhere or do anything in high school.
So you were
So
quiet.
yeah, I mean, I played sports, but I didn't really. I never went out, never had a date, never. I wasn't quiet. I think I was always a jokester in class and that sort of thing. Talked a lot, but as far as like friends, and I never really did that until college. Then I went crazy.
Right.
Then I
That's
went
funny.
insane. Yeah.
Well, I'm all about generation, so I'm assuming you are part of Generation X. Is that correct?
I'm right on that cusp somewhere,
Okay.
born in the about mid 60s. So yeah.
Well, I just
Uh,
assume when I'm obsessed with pop culture and like no weird birthdays and stuff. So I'm assuming since you were born in like the mid to somewhere in the 60s that it's
yeah.
like you would have gone to high school with Kurt Cobain. So that's Generation X in my head.
I was high school in the 70s.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah, that I'm old. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then well,
What's after Gen X? Baby
Gen
boomers.
X is so Gen X and then it's millennials, which
Oh,
is
millennials. I forgot millennials. Yeah, I forgot that.
yeah, most people do.
Middle child. Yeah, so yeah, I went to high school in the 70s and college in the 80s.
Okay. Well, then what was just growing up? What was the 80s like essentially? I was born in the 80s, so I tend to be obsessed with that decade. What was that like?
Yeah. Well, it was more reckless, I think, than today's youth. I think just
Really?
because I think in the sense that like when I was in college, my fraternity was a horrible mess, but drinking was just it was there. It was I think like my daughter is rushing a sorority this year at USC, and you can't even have a picture on Instagram or anything with alcohol. They're not supposed to drink; they have to be dry, and they can't have alcohol in the frats or sororities the way I understand it. I'm sure they do,
Hmm.
but ours was just like out there, giant kegs in the front yard and massive drinking every weekend. So I think it was a little bit. Well, I mean, I know that obviously everybody drinks and parties and or whatever, but I know that it's at least they try to keep it a little quieter. I think now that's the impression I get, but maybe they're all trying to fool me because it was just out there,
Hmm.
and it was ridiculous and
Almost just like no
fun,
big deal.
right? Yeah, yeah. I mean, well, I guess eventually, see, about 4 years after I graduated, they condemned my whole frat. They just tore it down and because
Hmm.
it was in horrible disarray. But it was, and it wasn't like I didn't find it as difficult to get into college or worried about getting into college. It wasn't as expensive. I mean, my dad's just a teacher. We figured it out, but it was, relative to inflation, college is like, whew, way super expensive. Um, and I never stressed about what I needed to do. I have to do? And I know that sounds terrible, but we never thought about doing volunteer work to get into college. Wasn't even on the radar. My daughter had to do so many hours and not have to, I guess,
Hmm.
but it was
I get what
never.
I'm saying. Where there's
Yeah,
like it seems to be asking more of kids to go to point A essentially.
yeah, and I think you think about it more. I don't. Maybe it was just in the circle and group that in the early 80s, it wasn't a lot of stress about any news type stuff. You didn't stress about climate, or you didn't stress about and I'm
Just
not saying it's
everything.
worse than, I'm saying you didn't even think about these things, or violence or crime. And even if, well, that's my dog going insane. So that part of it, I think, is different. They seem to be much more aware. My daughter and her friends, Jill, gee, sorry about that.
No, it's fine. It's fine.
Somebody rang the doorbell. I think they're a little more aware, or at least they're presented in the media as more aware of everything that's going on in the world, because they have the ability to be aware because of social media. We,
Mhm.
in college, the only way in the 80s was to watch a 6 o'clock or 11 o'clock news, and you sure as hell in the most cases weren't doing that.
Right.
Right? You weren't. You might get the USA Today, maybe. So it wasn't
Just not
uh,
in your face as
no
much.
CNN that you really worried about, or Fox News. Yeah, it just wasn't in your face on the daily, right? It's a whole different.
God, now, yeah. I guess I don't know if it's subconscious, but I mean, I guess also too, I've downloaded all these like news apps. So I mean, it's every half
Yeah,
hour, just constantly boop boop boop.
right. I don't remember even. I mean, you did think you knew stuff once in a while, like, oh, I hate Reagan or I hate whoever, but you really didn't have much to go on. You just kind of said it because
It was a
your
vibe.
friends did or your parents did or whatever. Because where were you getting information?
Interesting.
Like I said, it was like the USA Today and maybe maybe like the town paper or something. Lock Haven was a small town where I went to school, but in your college, you're not really picking up the towny paper. So it's really all you got is the USA Today and maybe a Newsweek or something would come across your desk. But right, there's just no other way to get anything.
Interesting. Well, it's almost like ignorance is bliss, I guess, sounds like.
Yeah, and again, it could be just my circle, but even if obviously there was, I don't remember anybody protesting anything in the early 80s. That was a kind of a window. So we didn't have, no Nam was gone or whatever. So the draft was history. In the 80s, people didn't like the materialism of one group, perhaps the yuppies or something like that. But when you're in college, you're like, what do I care? I know I don't have money and I don't care. There's no keeping up with the Joneses because you didn't see a social media person had
XYZ.
the XYZ thing. And sometimes in my case, people like this stupid frat that I don't say stupid in a
Yeah, no.
pejorative way, just like, the kid that would come in with the Izod shirt, you're like, get out of here. We don't like you because you're preppy. Or, that was the extent of the anger.
Interesting.
Someone was preppy, or someone was, rock and roll, or somebody was, disco or whatever it might be. That was the biggest concern you had.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
So many angles and stories, but essentially, how did you get into the radio world?
I loved sports. I played, but not well in high school, baseball and basketball a little bit. Sat on the bench a lot. And I have I'm a bit of an Aspie, so I pick up, not a bit of, I'm an Aspie. So I know that the Asperger's doesn't exist anymore technically, but
Really?
yeah, it's not a,
See, that's news to me.
yeah, they took it off the official list,
Okay. Okay.
but
Okay.
it's easier to describe it this way.
Right.
So that was my interest, and Aspies have this thing that they're really interested in. A lot of times, for a while, I thought it can't possibly be me because Aspies are sci-fi or like super numbers, whatever.
Hmm.
Mine was sports numbers and statistics, and all I did was read sports, watch sports, play little dice games, do things, and I
What's your
could
thing?
recite. My parents are like, "Hey, come on in here, tell everybody what Mike Schmidt is batting. 304 point, 304-2 with 14 homers and 87 RBIs as of an hour ago." They know all these weird stats, and so I'm like, I got to do sports, and I was self-aware enough to know that I sucked. So I'm like, what can I do to tie in? And so I went and thought broadcasting and got a job doing with a local station in town in Doylestown doing sports. Went to college thinking that's what I was going to do. Did a ton of stuff in college, most of the play-by-play for most of these sports. And then I worked for the town radio station doing sports for them. The morning guy quit. They needed a morning guy on the country station, and I needed money. So I'm like, I'll do that and the sports. Somebody heard me doing the morning show, offered me more money to move to a different town and give up the sports. And I'm like, I'm in. I'll do that. I'll go do this rock station thing and be Howard Stern or somebody. And so the sports was gone. But that's how it all, long story to get to.
That's how it
Once,
started.
yeah, once I entered that, then it was stick with it and radio thing.
Talked to JD last week, and it sounds like he moved a lot. Obviously, that wasn't really the case with you since you've been in Charlotte for so long?
Yeah, so I've been lucky with the Charlotte thing, and I was in the first stop was in Johnstown, PA, which I was there for probably 5 or 6 years, and then a 1 year stop at Ocean City, then 6 or 7 years in Columbus, and then a year, and then here. So yeah, I had 2 medium runs and then a really long run here.
Wow. Well, does anyone kind of, I mean, I guess, like I said, I'm obsessed with everything like media related, but in your opinion, how has like media, how has radio essentially changed?
Well, one of the big things is they're owned by only a few companies now, as opposed to when I first started, there was a lot of mom and pops or regional, that sort of thing. There was syndication hadn't started really strong till, and even in the 90s, it was still there, but it really blew up when they were able to do satellite versus buying time. It became cheaper to syndicate, and more stations were owned by just a few companies. And because of that, then the consolidation caused a lot of loss in jobs, both off air and on air. But they would just put everybody in one group. And now I think COVID hurt a lot of radio jobs too. I think they discovered that it could do at least what they perceived to be an okay job with less people and less talent, and pay, they had to pick out a salary thing, I guess, because of the losses during COVID. And so salaries, the people who had been around for a while, a lot of them were replaced by younger, cheaper talent. And it's become, and because of that, they also, a lot of companies don't want to build up a personality, because you build up a personality, then you've got to pay them or her, or if you just play music, they feel those people are replaceable. And so I can give them this smaller fee because I can have anybody introduce the next Taylor Swift song or Beyonce song. So I think there's less interest in hyping up personalities than there used to be. I'm in a pretty good situation when I'm in, but it's been a horror show for a lot of talent out in the radio industry.
Interesting. And do you think that like this is how it's going to be, or do you think that like any predictions in the future of like if there will be like an uptick or?
If stations are forced to spin off some of their radio stations to smaller companies, that could happen. I think it's going to be more and more difficult. The pie is being, the advertising pie is getting divided up a lot more with the advent of podcast and YouTube channels and all the influencers and various, like, there's so many ways to, if you want to call it media, make some sort of impact and get some advertising, that I don't know, the advertising will never go back to what it was 5 or 10 years ago. And then you're going to have the added pressure of trying to get people to listen to the radio, because at some point, as the next generations come up, more and more people are going to be just plugging in their phone to their car, Apple CarPlay or whatever it might be. And some people are listening going, oh, we all do that. But you don't. You might think that because all your friends do, but that doesn't mean that everybody is. That's the weird thing too. A lot of people think everybody does something where they know does something, but that's not really the case.
Okay.
In this case, not everybody plugs their phone in to listen to Spotify or a station somewhere or a podcast or whatever. But I think at some point, it's not most now, but it's going to be 60, 70% of people will be inventing their own radio station when they're traveling. And that's the time when most people listen to the radio is, you're in your car. I mean, getting ready in the morning is another one, but that is even fading a little bit, right? People are listening to a podcast or Spotify or a radio station where they grew up, or that's
Hmm.
become a thing. So radio is going to have to reinvent itself, or I believe they're going to have to give people a reason to want to listen, and that is personality driven shows.
Hmm.
Because there'll come a point when people will, almost all people, will get in their car and play their radio station, in the words, through Spotify or whatever they're on, where they get to pick all the music, and they can even will eventually just be able to plug in whatever some AI or something that'll give the weather, or tell them what local events are coming up or something. So unless the radio gives people a real reason to listen, whether it be they're giving them super local information, or they have somebody who's super entertaining, they will struggle.
Hmm.
There's no question in my mind about that.
Just there's, I guess now we're just at a place where there's just so many options of what you want to tune into.
Yeah, yeah, and it's only been in the last few years, but it's been easy peasy to hook your phone up to your car.
Hmm.
I mean, like my parents, even some of my friends in their 50s are like, how do I get this to? I just listen to the radio because it's what I always did. Whatever. I don't. I asked my daughter, who's 18. She's never turns on the radio unless it's just a freak of nature. But normally
Happens
she
to
just
me.
plugs her phone in right away when she gets in. She's listening to what her and her friends listen
No,
to.
I understand.
You know what I mean? So it's the habits will continue to change.
Well, speaking of podcasting, you are also in the podcasting world.
Yes.
I know you've got two shows, but specifically, I am obsessed with crime. How did that come about?
The Impact of Influence podcast I do with Seton Tucker started about 2 weeks or 10 days after the murders of Maggie and Paul Murdoch in the low country of South Carolina, Hampton, which is kind of near, let's see, it's probably about 30 miles from Charleston. And these murders were huge because nothing happens in this small town. And the family was prominent. And Alec Murdoch, many of you followed him, won't break it all down, but he ended up being found guilty of killing Maggie and Paul. So when Maggie and Paul were murdered, Seton, my co-host, had been following the Murdochs because of a boating accident that
The son was
made a
involved in.
fatality. Yeah. The son was allegedly driving, Paul Murdoch, who was shot and killed. And so she'd been following because she got sucked up into. She grew up in Hilton Head and knew the area and was into boating in Mallory Beach. So, she's a daughter, blah blah blah. She'd been following it. The murders happened. She's out with a friend of mine, and she says, "A friend of mine, this story, like you won't believe what just happened, and this guy's also connected to this hit and run and this boating thing." And she's like, "It's blowing my mind." And she's like, "I want to do something about it because I have all these clippings that are virtual clippings, and I know everything about it, and I want to do a podcast. I don't know how to do a podcast." My friend's like, "That's weird. Matt Harris has been talking about doing a true crime podcast with me forever. He's been looking for a case. Why don't you call him?" And she knew me peripherally. I mean, I'd met her a few times, but
Mhm.
more of a friend kind of thing. We got together the next day, and then next day we tried to do a podcast. Technically, it was a mess. We found a producer who had never done it before, but I knew him from other stuff. So we get in, we do the podcast. It was the first podcast on the topic, and it's been we're about at 9.5 million downloads, over 2 years of content every single week. It has been an amazing ride. And it started in such a weird way.
Mhm.
And our podcast is, at one point we thought about making it tighter, and a lot of those crime ones are very buttoned up. And they're also doing a lot of times about a crime that already has been committed, so they can script it out and do whatever. Ours was a lot of times on the fly, like literally hearing news, driving as fast as we could to the podcast thing, getting in there, digesting it, and trying to make sense out of it. And she'd never done any kind of broadcasting. And so we decided just to let it be raw and let it be very conversational. And people seem to have liked it. And when we did one that was more scripted. People are like, what are you doing? That's not you. Like,
Interesting.
okay. So now when we're doing some other cases now, we only do kind of bullet points and talk about it before we go on. And then we get on and discuss. And then if we forget a fact, we, pause or edit or whatever. But in general, it's us shooting the crap kind of like anybody would who had heard about a crime. Right. Like I will tell her sometimes when we're doing Murdoch or whatever, I'd say, okay, know everything you need to know about this part of the story. And I'll know everything about this part of the story. And then when I tell you, you'll be like, wait, what? And I'll be like, wait, more of a natural kind of thing, as if I was listening to the story. I'd be like, oh, wait a minute. Did you just say his car was seen, blah, blah, blah? Yeah, that's what I said. Really? Where'd you read that? And then we always give credit to, we saw that John Monk wrote that in the State, or so-and-so wrote that. Because we're doing a lot of aggregating of stories when we were doing that, but we were also doing our own reporting. We had connections down there through just doing the story, going down there and visiting and seeing some people down there. And then we started to get to know some people, and they would give us some inside information. And so we did some of that. And then, but we aggregated a lot and give credit to the people who did it. But it was crazy. It was a wild ride. It still is. I still can't believe they're listening to us babble on. And ended up doing court TV almost every single night through the trial, which was.
What was that like? Yeah, because I know you were like on CNN and stuff. Like, what was that like?
Depending on the show, like court TV with Vinny Politano was great because he eventually started to know the case really well. In the early part, when we were doing this before Alec had even been charged, sometimes you go on a CNN or a Chris Cuomo show or a Nancy Grace, and sometimes they didn't know
as much as you did.
Yeah, or they would ask a question that was like not really a question. They'd make a statement and then a question. Sometimes I'd be like, well, that's not really what happened, or something like that. A lot of times I just let them go and like, and then so it was interesting that I'm like, I wonder, did your producers not tell you anything? And sometimes I'm like, what? As the trial started going, then people started to know it more. And it was hard because you have very limited time, not like a podcast. So your answer is you don't know what they're going to ask about this super long story, intricate story from the voting accident, Stephen Smith hit and run, all the crimes financially, the Alec Murdoch murder. And then we'll say, join us at 8:00. Okay. Wonder what they're going to ask. And I'd have some of my notes near me in case they ask, because it's hard to put it all up there, exact number. It could be like, how much money did he exactly take? 652,000 or something, whatever. So that was, it was fun. It was fun. You had to be on the go, baby. You had to be ready to answer whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they did throw you a curveball, and I just didn't want to sound dumb, so I'd either answer something they didn't ask or just scoot around it, because you don't have time to correct them. The windows are short. They're in your ear the whole time. Like, you've got answer this, and not the whole time, but they'll be like, okay, 30-second answer, or whatever. Really
God, yeah. Like I tell all my guests, unfortunately, I'm on a timer. So before I get cut off, I still have a solid 8 minutes. I always ask the guests to give a shout out to their social media, or where they can find you here in Charlotte, or on the podcasting apps.
On the podcasting app, Impact of Influence. The Wicked South is another one we're doing now. So we have those two pods. On the radio, Mix 107.9 from 6 to 10 a.m. Matt Harris on the various socials, Mix 107.9, or the Morning Mix on Instagram. All those cool places.
But okay, so towards the end, I always end on like a funky note. Now, I didn't know this, but my sister told me this and was wondering if this is true, because I tried to YouTube and I couldn't find it. My sister claims she remembers watching you back in the day on Queer Eye for the Straight Eye.
Close.
Okay.
Very close. It was What Not to Wear.
Okay.
What Not to Wear with Clinton.
Well, something
Kelly.
with dressing.
Yes. That was insane. That was a good time. It was one of those things where they say you're dressing crappy, and then they take you to New York and buy you clothes and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was Clinton Kelly and Stacy and Clinton and I. We had the best time. We shot the first day, and we went out that night partied our asses off.
How
And
fun.
we were so hungover. He was so hungover the next day. He comes in for the shoot, and I'm laying there, and he's laying on the couch. He's like, "I hate you." And I'm like, "That's great. I hate you too. Let's do this." And then when we did the reunion show at the end of it, like 10 years, whatever it was, I met him in Vegas, partied out there again.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, it was he's super cool guy, and it was really a good experience.
Now, how did you get like, how did that offer come to you?
I The way I recall it is we found out about the thing, or Ramona found out about it, nominated me
Oh, okay.
for being a horrible dresser. And then they followed me around with hidden cameras, and I was wearing just cargo shirts and baggy shirts or blah, blah, blah. So they wanted me in better fitting stuff. And, you know, I did play it up a little bit, but it was pretty bad. Yeah, I wasn't a great dresser. I'm still not. But so they took me to these fancy stores in New York, and I'm like, what?
Right.
$400 for flip flops? Are you kidding me? But yeah. So they got nominated. They did the show, and it was weird because I was in like South Park Mall a couple times, and somebody become, "Are you Matt from?" I'm like, "I'm from the radio." No, from that show. And I'm from Atlanta, and I saw you on that show. That was a great episode. I'm like, "Oh,
How
okay."
funny.
Yeah, it was weird. So I couldn't go to Home Depot without dressing nice because people are like, "Hey,
Like, what are you wearing?
I'm going to report you to Clinton."
Is there anyone that you can share that you've interviewed or been in the same vicinity of that's like, a celebrity that was just like awful?
Awful. Oh, the awful ones. Well, we had I don't even want to restir the pot. Just Google Rob Thomas and Matt Harris. But we made up. And it ended up super cool. We just had a moment in the early 2000s, and then he turned it around.
Did he just think he was like Elvis or something?
Yeah, he didn't show up for me, and so I blasted him. And Rachel Ray was not nice.
That's not a shocker.
Surprisingly, Amy Poehler was not nice. I mean, they could have been having bad days. It's possible. Cyndi Lauper was the most amazing, nice person.
Oh,
She was super, super nice in spite of what Will Smith just did. He was super, super nice when it was like 20. No, it was like earlier than that, late 90s. We did the thing with but he was super cool. I'm trying to think who else had an attitude with us. Jewel had a bit of an attitude. In fact, when I interviewed Jewel first time in the 90s, then again in like a few years ago, I asked her about it. And she said, I was a little full of myself back then when I first started. She's like, I admit that I probably wasn't a great interview. I'm like, okay, cool. So,
well,
yeah.
That's kind of cool that it sounds like with the couple, you kind of come back full circle years later.
Yeah. I don't, if it happened, I'm going to bring it up to him and say, what was the dealio on that last time? Were you in a bad place? What went on? But, a lot of these people, like anybody, they're doing 1,000 interviews a day. It's possible. Also, they're super young, maybe. Everybody's different than at, 40 than they were at 25, right?
Mm-hmm.
They think they're a cool rock star.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, people have been super cool. Bon Jovi was cool. Richie Sambora. Most people at least fake it if you're doing the radio thing, So I try to see how they treat their people around them, or
Yes.
what they demand during a break of people, that sort of thing.
Well, I'm sure obviously since you've been doing it for so many years, but like, do you ever, like what happened, or do you get better with like celebrities, or you're like, oh my God, I'm more nervous now to like do my job essentially, or has that gone away?
I think I'm way less nervous. I think there was a time, and it wasn't like a nervous, like to ask them questions. I always think I've been a decent interviewer, but I think I had this lingering thought that maybe we'll be friends. So I've got to act like really cool with them. Yeah. And, and so I put like more of a social anxiety on myself. Once the mics were on, I was good. I think when the mics were up, I think I was like, hey, you be my friend. You be my friend. Not that obvious, but I worried about like, am I being cool or not? Now I'm like, I know you're doing your job, getting interviewed. I'm doing my job. I don't have any stress. I stress only like I would for anybody. Like when you came on the show, I will stress the new person talking to him, but that would be no different than if, Beyonce walked in or something. I don't think.
Right. Well, that's cool. That's cool that like essentially everyone's Not that you wouldn't treat everyone equal, but just, I mean, obviously I interview people too. I mean, sometimes I'm still, even though I've been doing this for a few years, it's still like, yeah, depending on who you sit down with, I don't know if you've met them before, if you haven't, I don't know. But
Yeah, whether there's, and some people aren't as a big mouth as I am. Just go on and on and on. So, if you have somebody who's giving you one word answers and stuff, as you know, then
you gotta like
I
pull,
don't know. Yeah. I don't know if nervous is the right word, but you're also like, you're just like,
you're geared up.
yeah. And sometimes you have limited time with somebody, and then it's a 5-minute interview, and they will give you the super long answer. And a lot of times, for a celebrity's sake, it's so you don't get to anything
Personal.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got a little over a minute left, and like I said, I'm gonna go till I get cut off. But are other radio people in town specifically like, are they competitive with each other if they run into each other in public, or is that more back in the day? Or
I never had any problems really with fellow radio people. Occasionally, maybe some, but nothing big. But no, I've always gotten along with the people in town.
that's awesome.
Podcasting different. Some of the Murdoch podcast people were trolly and mean and awful.
Really?
Yes.
You
Not of course, Katie. They
but
come after us. Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. Terrible. Some of them.
How do you, I don't know, how do you not take that personally?
I guess maybe you can beat up for years in this industry as far as like people saying, "Oh, I don't listen to you. I don't like your show."
So I guess it's not totally foreign.
It was really hard for Seton, and they would go after her more than me. And I think they were other women. I think it was a gender issue where they were
Not surprising, I guess.
it was unfortunate.